There we go. All means all, whether or not we say it, but we don't necessarily always stop to think about, well, what does this look like? It's often used in terms of special ed students or students with 504 plans, and we say all means all. But in fact, we're really looking at also the students who are marginalized, and they could be marginalized in a bazillion different ways. But when we start to look at assistive tech, realizing that yes, it's for certainly for students who are identified with specific needs, but it also can really be used to leverage an advantage for students who are marginalized. And then there's times when we find that assistive technology, when correctly deployed, really benefits all students. So some of our, just real quickly here, I know you're using a lot of, many of you are very familiar with this work, but communication tools or keyboards might be for identified students. Dyslexia script might be something that's, again, for students who have been identified. But then you get down to screen readers and closed captioning and realizing that many marginalized students who aren't specifically identified, really benefit from those kinds of tools, and including students whose English is not a first language for them. Particularly, as an adult, I absolutely adore. I'd be angry at you if you took away my audiobooks. And so audiobooks can really benefit all students, regardless of a learning ability or whether or not they're marginalized. I even listed just even something as simple as left-handed scissors, making sure that we really do attend to the needs of all kids. UDL, Kathy, do you want to talk a little bit about UDL? You were the specialist here in Janesville that really introduced this concept to us, and it's really taken off and is used really broadly. But if you could talk a little bit about UDL and what it meant for students here.
Absolutely. Thanks, Bob. We looked at universal design for learning is our students with special needs, often one of the things that they don't want is they don't want to stand out. You already have a disability, you're already unique in many ways. And for whatever reason, nobody wants that. Nobody wanted to be different. And they already had all those things stacked against them. So we really were looking at what kind of equipment or what could we provide to all students so that we could then reduce a lot of those barriers. Because that's the thing that we found out so often is the kids are like, well, I don't want to use that because I'm going to be different. So we started to change our language and started to change how we approach things. So instead of saying that we're going to have a professional development, maybe on a very specific piece of software that was very special ed, we provided that software for all students. And then we just changed the narrative on that. We might have said something like, let's improve our writing skills for kids. And maybe we were talking about something like co-writer or word prediction program. So those are the kind of things that we were able to do in Janesville, and I think it made a huge difference. We had reg ed and special ed that came together. We had monthly meetings with our library media people and other coaches from different schools. So not just looking at special ed, because a student belongs to all classrooms, not just to a special ed classroom. So that's kind of how we got involved in that. You want to add anything, Bob, or are we good?
No, I think that's really where we want to go. And if you have that philosophy, that philosophical point that you're saying, look, all really means all. And one way to get there certainly is universal design for learning, but really to embrace that concept that says, this is where I'm hanging my hat. And so it becomes important for so many kids. So if we look at the next slide, really looking to see, want to open up the floor, do you have any strong examples of, or an example about UDL, that how maybe you've used it or what you're doing with it in your district? And so we'll leave the mic open here and ask you to share anything that you might be able to in terms of an example across the state.
And as those are coming in, I just wanted to add one really quick that we did in Janesville that turned out really well. Is in the beginning when we were looking at Chromebooks, we looked at Chromebooks that didn't have touch screens, and that really wasn't the best for everybody. So we started looking because most kids needed a mouse. So we started looking at Chromebooks for all students with touch windows, and it made a huge difference for all of our students. Anybody else want to share?
Kathy, that's a great example. So we have today Chromebooks 612. I know everybody's got a slightly different deployment plan, and we're using iPads K5. So everyone has a touch screen, even though they might not have all the exact same devices, but they all have an interactive screen that they can actually touch with. And in fact, we've done the same thing for all of the staff. So let's not forget our staff also have some different learning needs as well. We've made sure that staff have a matching device. So if your children have iPads, so do you. If your children have a Chromebook, so do you. And so every teacher also has a touch device as well.
We have one in the chat, Bob. Mary, thanks for putting something in there. She talked about building thinking classrooms for all students. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more, Mary?
Yes.
Thanks for using one of your poker chips.
Yeah. I was in a workshop with other teachers, and I just think that we should include special needs students into this philosophy. Building thinking classrooms is researched by Peter Liljedahl. He's a math teacher, but it could be used for all courses. So we need to get into like be in the curriculum, literacy curriculum, whatever the curriculum improvement areas. We need to go into that and work with those people who are trying to improve the education, but we improve it in the general ed environment. Peter studied 40 different classrooms for 14 years, and it is like is totally different format where you stand up and you work at a board or an erasable board, and you have to have it erasable because otherwise the kids will not will hesitate to put anything on there because they can't erase it. And there's a whole philosophy of it. He wrote a book, and it really has increased the thinking skills. What he says is there's 3 goals for successful students. One is be persistent. Second is the ability to collaborate. And third is the ability to take risk. And those 3 things they're learning with this building thinking classroom setup. And I could go on and on, but
Well, thank you so much for sharing. You actually bring up really good points that we're going to talk about later, because we're talking about curriculum and how we need to look at the curriculum from the other side. So thanks so much for sharing.
As we look at
Back to you, Bob.
As we look at the larger concepts about way that we set up systems and the way that we make sure that systems are functioning correctly, one of the concepts would be decisions are made by those who show up. If you're an AT specialist, if you're someone who works with assistive technology, do you have a seat at the table? And if you don't have a seat and I listed 4 here as examples, do you have a seat at the table when curriculum is being selected? The fact that curriculum needs to be selected on the front end with an idea concerning access and like on the front end, we got to know that this is going to work for our kids. In some cases, I know in Janesville, we do a lot of discussion around professional development. Before it actually happens, we have this really long discussion around PD. Well, are you, as an AT person, at the table helping to plan what that professional development looks like? Your board, typically, most school boards have a policy about library materials selection. Are you able to be at the table to help with that selection, to identify where materials can be strengthened in a way that improves access, especially when we're looking at electronic materials or access to electronic resources? And then certainly, do you have a place at the table in terms of IT? When IT is being discussed, when you're having, in fact, it came up the other day right here in Janesville at the heart of this conversation about how to even make that stronger, how we could do a better job internally to make sure that AT has a stronger place at our table. So just as you think about, do you have a place at the table and where can you sort of make a place for yourself to have a spot at that table? Any thoughts about that, or have you found that is working for you? Do you have a place at the table? You can put something like that in the chat and we'll monitor it and we'll come back and get a summary from people as we move through this. The next topic that I want to spend a few minutes talking about is about vendors and partners. A vendor is a person who just supplies, I don't know, maybe what you're looking for. But a partner is someone who comes to the table and really helps you with solving problems. It's important that you build that relationship with some of those key vendors and those key partners, and gave a couple examples here. If you're looking at e-resources, do you have an active relationship concerning accessibility with those vendors or those partners? In other words, do you have, if it's McGraw-Hill or Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, do you actually have someone there that you're able to work with and talk with to problem solve and to increase their understanding of how they need to make their product more successful for kids or for students that need accessibility? The same thing about library media resources. If you're able to work with your LMS staff, reviewing materials for accessibility, do they even know what to look for? Perhaps there's a need for some professional development for them such that they really begin to look at those resources through different lenses and a different set of eyes. In terms of vendors and partners, there's another next screen. I could.
Dr. Smiley, also in the chat, we had some participants say, back to your question, do you have a seat at the table? Not currently, but it's something we're actively discussing and working on.
Good. And happy to help with that as you're maybe find some challenges there. Well, why should you be here? Well, I think we can certainly help explain that. Is there any brief stories that you might have? Here's another chance to spend one of your poker chips. Any brief stories or advice to share about working with either the IT staff, your library media staff, or even your academic learning coaches? Anything that you have found successful?
Could I add that?
Oh, no, please go ahead, Eric.
I'm sorry. Could I add that sometimes it's tricky too, not only just to get a seat at the table, but then also to stay there and to stay in the forefront of people's minds. As I've gotten, our district in Milwaukee has had a few times where we've been invited in and then sort of not addressed as big decisions are getting made. So we have to continually make sure that they remember that we're there and that we have that place.
That's a really important point. Just because you're there today doesn't mean you're going to have a spot there tomorrow. And especially in some of the larger districts, it might be easier to be forgotten. And it's really vital to keep your foot in that door. Any strategies, Eric, that you have found that were particularly helpful?
That's a good question. I think I try to make myself helpful so that then I'm brought in a little bit quicker. I think that's maybe the closest I've found, but it is even in my really great relationships with people that I feel really strong about those relationships. There's times when decisions will get made and I'll have to find out later that, you know, if you had asked me, I would have had some input, I think, that would have helped in this. So there's still some backtracking in that, even in the strong relationships.
So Eric, one of the things that even as CIO, once in a while, I'm forgotten. Oh, we did a curriculum adoption and we didn't tell you. So I'm not throwing anybody under the bus, but it's happened, right? And so I find that if I continue to go back every couple of months to someone in curriculum and instruction or whatever you might call that department, and I say, hey, by the way, I want to be on the front end of anything that might be coming up in terms of curriculum adoption. Do you have anything on the horizon? So I'm actually in their space asking for them to forecast for me. Oh, well, we haven't started the work yet, but we're thinking about a science adoption. And I say something like, wow, that's going to be really important that IT is at the table or that assistive tech is at the table. Can you make sure that we get invited to those early meetings? And so really it's almost as if I have to keep going back regularly to remind them and I'm not blaming. It's just that a lot of times we have narrow perspectives based on our own, we focus on what we have to get done.
We had a couple more comments, if we can, just in the chat. It says, I have been invited in person to join a committee related to curriculum, but am waiting to hear where we are in the process of starting the committee. I never know how often to check back in. I have relationships and demonstrate the services and supports I can provide, and agrees with Eric and the experience as well. And then on the heels of that, and it is difficult for related services to be included. So just wanted to add those to the conversation.
Thank you. That's great. Another area about vendors and partners is in the area of hardware. And I think that this might make some sense. Sometimes it's a little intimidating to think that we're going to actually influence the design of an HP Chromebook because it's just a huge company, right? In our case, we've got some pretty positive examples about interactive whiteboards. We're one of the largest, there's no bragging here, it's statement of fact. We're one of the largest deployments of smart panels. And so when we connected our assistive technology staff with Smart, they've been really, really receptive to us because they know that we're serious about the product and that we're really serious about serving students. And so anyone have any experience with hardware vendors, maybe with copiers and scanners that did a better, got a higher set of resolution coming out of those, or anything from a Windows or Apple deployment? Any experiences with any of that?
Bob, as people are thinking about that, one of the things I think about is with our copiers and scanners. When I worked in Janesville, was that we were looking at that time to be able to do optical character recognition and do it very quickly with our students. And actually, we taught our students how to use the copiers so that if a teacher did give them something that was inaccessible, how could they make it accessible themselves? And it was great to sit down with the copier vendors and say, hey, we need the best kind of view that we can of this, the highest resolution that we can from these copiers. And this is the reason. And once they understood the reason, they were like, oh yeah, you can do that. But so we had to give them the reason. And then they kind of came back on the other side and they said, oh yeah, this is how we do that. So I think that was a great example.
I think that's true, Kathy. And then sometimes even in that case, what you were sharing, it might be as simple as saying, set the default to a higher resolution. So everything coming off of that scanner or that copier really is at the resolution needed for an effective OCR. In other words, we don't make anyone from AT have to jump through any special hoops or to remember to reset the settings every time they use it. You can have it set as a default. So that's a great example of working with a vendor to get something set the way you need it to be. And they probably just haven't thought about it. It's not something that a typical MFP, multifunction printer is what that stands for. An MFP salesman is going to think about, But again, it does become important to have those relationships. Kathy, you want to go to the next slide? Another area that for vendors and partners has to do with software. Sometimes it's very specialized software, and sometimes it's more general, such as something from Google. But Kathy, do you want to talk about your work with Don Johnston, and now that they're also doing text help, maybe you can talk with a little bit about our previous experience with them from the School District of Janesville.
The nice thing about our partnership with Don Johnson, and now it's Don Johnson Text Help, was so wonderful in that you could call their 800 number, 1-800. I can rattle the number off for you. I always got a real person, and that meant an awful lot when we were having issues with something, so that we could actually talk to someone and get answers in real time. And they were a very good company, and they are a very good company for listening to the issues that we have so that it can be quickly corrected. And they also want to know from our side, what are the issues that we're having and we're seeing with students, so that they know how to build the right products. So, you kind of want to look at it from that perspective too. Oftentimes I think it's daunting for us to go ahead and talk to some of these people at conferences or whatever, or just pick up the phone and call them, because we think that we're like nothing to them, but we are everything to them. They can't do their job unless we do our job too, and unless we collaborate together. So that collaboration is huge. And the same thing, and you can talk more about this, Bob, with Google. How many times do we go to a conference and talk to the Google folks and say, hey, we need something that will allow a student who maybe has a limb difference, or maybe only has the ability to move their one finger. They need to be able to do X, Y, and Z on their computer. And they want to know those things because they want to make their products as accessible as possible.
I think Kathy in the chat, there was, sorry, in the chat, just a comment about how valuable the UPAR accessibility and the UPAR Universal Protocol for Accommodations for Reading assessment tool is. So
Kathy played a significant role in bringing that to the School District of Janesville, but she also played a significant role in Don Johnston getting that better and more accessible for more students. And so kudos to Kathy again. It's that decisions are made by those who show up. And so by showing up and being present and being persistent about what's needed for kids really does help them. I was going to tell a short story. I think it was Khrushchev who took his shoe off at the UN and banged it on the podium to get people's attention, because he really wanted them to pay attention to what he wanted to say. And you might have to be that dramatic to get your attention across. But it's sometimes when you really are passionate about what you're looking for. So whether it's with Google, you certainly want to build a relationship, but bringing your passion to the table and the tenacity to continue to follow up again and again really can end up with some really great results for kids.
Oh, and Bob, just one more thing to add to that as we go on to the next slide is that we remember our students are students today, but tomorrow they're in transition, and they're either in a college situation or a work situation, and their technology that they're using today is what is going to help them be a productive member of society tomorrow. So, technology is not going to go away. I think we all can agree upon that, right? It's just not going to go away. And someone's disability doesn't go away just because they graduate from school, graduate from like a high school. It just doesn't. So, our job is to make sure that our students are ready, career and college ready. And the only way for us to do that is to continue to work with companies like Don Johnson and Google and build those relationships and say that these are the tools that we need to make our students successful for tomorrow.
Exactly. And so whether we're giving just a couple of examples, but literally there are a lot of vendors out there. And if you talk to them and say, look, I've really got this need, whether it's just something as simple as, oh my God, I need an effective, secure login for first graders. And we kept banging and banging on that door. And now again, I'm not promoting a single product, but we use a product here in Janesville called ClassLink, and it has a QR code for each student. And so it makes it possible for regular ed students and those with identified needs to be able to log in on their own and in a secure fashion. And so again, depending on what you're advocating for, you really can work with those vendors to get solutions. Let's open up the conversation and ask you to spend another one of those poker chips. What have you found, if you've been doing this work, what have you found that's worked effectively with vendors or success with particular vendors? And is there any advice you'd want to share with others? So I'll open up the floor here and I'll be quiet for a moment.
There's a couple of participants putting resources and tools in the chat. Does anybody want to unmute and talk a little bit about those?
Sure, I can. New Jersey has a demonstration on Kiwi Write. It's AT space NJ, and then Tech Spotlight on Tech, I think it is, and they have recorded the webinars, I believe. So you can go back there and you can see exactly a demonstration on Kiwi Write. It's for elementary math, algebra, geometry, you name it. And the students don't get answers. It's not like using a calculator. It's more like working out the problem and, and putting the lines in and making sure the columns are neat. Where if somebody with dysgraphia has a major difficulty for doing that, or organization skills. And also, I had a student who did read and write for her homework or any kind of exposition that she had, because she could not, it was very laborious. She could not write anything. And but her vocal cords were also affected by her CP, so she would have a lot of errors. So to take care of that, I suggested a sip and puff, which that information I got from ATIA, and I went to that conference, and Origin Instruments out of Texas did do it for $1,000. So those are my suggestions. Oh, and then the Blackboard whiteboard marker. Please have the teachers use the lines, because if you use the lines, some of the handwriting problems will go away. Just K through 3. Use lines when you draw on the board or the whiteboard.
Thank you so much, Mary. We appreciate that. And it looks like Eric agrees with you on the Kiwi Write Math in the comments there. And also want to thank you for bringing up ATIA. What a great conference that is. Kathy and I will actually be presenting there in January, at the end of January, with the DPI team about our AT Forward project. So again, Mary, thank you so much for your participation. We appreciate it.
Welcome.
That is a really great conference. If you haven't had the chance to be there, I would encourage you to consider whether you can use maybe either some special ed funds or some Title II-D. I think that's right, for that professional development, and have a chance to go to that conference.